Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And today I'm really excited to have our guest, Jason Schroeder. Jason is the just started a company called ElevateConstruction.com. At least that's where you can find him. That's elevate.construction.com. For some reason, I left the dot out of there. And he is an expert on using lean principles in construction companies. And I have to tell you, I am fascinated by this because I've been saying for years that the secret unfair advantage that a construction company can have is to put a process improvement system in place, because none, and I mean none, of your competitors are doing this. So before I bring Jason on, I have to ask you to do something, though, because I keep forgetting about this, and it's really, really important. Please, 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 please go to wherever you listen to this podcast and give us an honest rating and review. It's really, really important. So let's bring Jason on and start the conversation. Hey, Jason, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on. This is a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this a ton. So, am I correct in saying that using something like lean in your construction company would give you an unfair advantage?
I believe so. I think we all know that construction is continues to either stay stagnant or it declines in our efficiency. Manufacturing is going up. Construction typically stays the same. I think the biggest problem is we have untrained leaders and an untrained workforce. Most of that workforce is nomadic. And with lean systems, we can really build cultures on site. And I think that's our next step to improve the efficiency in construction. So absolutely 100%. And I do agree with you. There are some companies out there that are doing great things, but it would give an unfair advantage. Well, I don't know if it's unfair, but it would give a really big advantage for whoever does it. Yes.
Yeah, I've been I the pew I worship at. Well, I worship at two pews, and the two are Agile, which is Scrum, and the theory of constraints, and I use them for different reasons in different companies that we work with. But you're an expert on lean, so I want to kind of get into what you mean by lean, because I think there's about 9,000 definitions. The typical definition or the traditional definition is the Toyota production system, because that's what became known as lean. And it is so complicated that unless you're doing, like making 50,000 Venzes or Highlanders, you really need to modify it. So how have you modified, or first of all, how do you use lean in a construction company, first of all? And then we can talk about maybe about modifying it.
Well, I'm glad that you asked me that question. And if we have any internet interruptions, just ask me to repeat myself, please. I hope we're good to go, though. I would define lean. I have my own definition for it, which starts at respect for people, stable environments, and continuous improvement. And I think, and so some of that's from the Toyota way and the 14 principles of the Toyota way. But the first one is respect for people. In my mind, respect for people, the individual, the environment, the workers, the customer, our neighbors, everybody. Respect for human beings and for their families really motivates us to then create stability on the project. And so to your question, to your point, construction has a lot of variation. There are, I would say, probably millions of moving parts. There are thousands of people that lead into it to prepare these projects. And if we can create stability for the people on site, for the managers, for our trade partners, for our supply chain, everyone, then we have standards that we can use to improve. And so that leads us to the continuous improvement. And if you work it backwards, we can't improve because we don't have stability, and we don't have stability because we don't have respect for people as a basis for what we do. And that might seem a little bit simple, but in construction, we're a little bit different. There has been a historical tendency to disrespect workers and to think of them like they're on a different class system, like they're at a lower level. And that's just absolutely not the case. These are skilled craftsmen and women that are professionals that deserve our respect and that do amazing things. And so if we can get respect back in construction, we can get stability and continuous improvement. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it actually, I'm going to go back to 1983, which is probably before you ever were doing anything like this. But 1983, I owned a food service company. And as far as I know, we were the first and only food service company to put a TQM program in, which stands for Total Quality Management, which was designed by W. Edwards Deming, which is the precursor to the Toyota Way. The 14 points actually are Deming's 14 points that you see in Toyota's lean process. And we did that in 1983, and we had some amazing, amazing results. But it was more from a fail fast, fail cheap, where we did small experiments along the way. They really
Okay.
process improvement as much. Although we did some process charts, we have P charts and C charts, which are statistical charts of what happens to normalize operations, and we worked on improving them. But it's a different sort of way. I mean, and I agree 100% that your employees are your most important part of your company. And a lot of companies say that, but they don't mean it and they don't do it. One of my core values is rights and respect, which basically means I respect you as a person, and I expect you to respect me as a person, and we're going to treat both each other as adults. And it's really important that we do that. And I think that you're right. Construction companies, because the people who own construction companies generally are craftsmen themselves, and they came up through the ranks, and they've never had any real management training, and they just do what they've been doing when they were worker bees and how they were managed. So you're bringing a brand new sort of thing. When you introduce this to the owner of a construction company, what's the normal response you get?
Well, I appreciate that. If I could do you mind if I take a step back and cover one more aspect of the definition of lean? Can I start there first?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So if we have respect, stability, and continuous improvement, most of what creates stability is flow. And we've all heard of one-piece flow, and we know that that's a basis for, a lot of what Ford and Toyota is trying to do. In construction, we have something called the critical path method. And so we use programs that do that for us. And basically, we have the overall duration of a project, and we enter a number of activities in a work breakdown structure, and we logic tie that into a precedence diagram. And that runs a forward and a backward path and tells us what is the critical path of this project. And that hasn't served us very well alone. I'm not saying it doesn't serve us well as a part of an entire system, but by itself, what it does is it brings everything on the construction project left. It brings it to its earliest possible start date, and it most of the time ignores the concept of flow. Meaning, CPM, what is our critical path and when should we start activities, mainly says, how soon can you start something, not when should you start something according to a customer need, according to a one-piece flow. And so going back to that definition of what is the definition of lean in construction, it is those three things that I talked about, but mainly it's creating flow, creating stability. And so to answer your other question, how do customers respond or how do we sell it? Most of the time we can prove that we can add value on a construction project specifically for the owner and for the designers if we can maintain that flow. And it does a couple of things for us. It creates stability. It creates predictability. It allows the owner to know from a financial cost management standpoint, when are we incurring certain costs on the project site? And it also allows us to properly maintain our supply chain or manage our supply chain. And here's another one is for designers. They're not like us in construction. They don't want things done on schedule as their top priority. They want things designed in an iterative cycle that gives them the most amount of creative time to design something. And so if construction companies historically are always saying, no, push everything as close to the start date as you can, that doesn't give the designers, the supply chain, our vendors, the coordination, the owner, and everybody to adapt and take care of and support the construction process. And so if we keep things on a nice flow, that gives the designers plenty of time, it gives predictability for the workers, it gives the owners predictability. And that's what I was talking to you about before we started recording. Tact planning, TAKT. Tact is a German word for rhythm or baton. And what it means is that we keep a rhythm and a flow in construction, which flow is king. And let me just say one more thing before we go to the next question is, if we can keep flow and we can keep predictable schedules and standard schedules that aren't moving all over the place, that we can reduce inventory, we can reduce manpower levels, we can reduce costs and increase our overall effectiveness, efficiency, and throughput on a project. And that's why it's so remarkable. So when we sell this to owners, most of the things that they appreciate is the flow, the predictability, the consistency, and how we get there as a project team.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I'm going to push back a little bit, because if I'm a construction guy, and I've actually spent 40 years now playing on process improvement stuff, and I've gotten a little bit. Some areas I'm really knowledgeable, and some I'm just a little bit knowledgeable. Six Sigma I don't know a whole lot about, except that 3M likes it, and it's highly mathematically based, really hard to do. So I don't even think about that for a small company. But in your particular case, the problem I have with what we call the waterfall method, which is your critical path that you're doing, is that when one thing goes out, you have to sort of replan the whole thing, because now you're out of sites. One of the reasons I like Scrum is that Scrum is done in sprints, 2 or 3 week sprints, sometimes less, sometimes a 1 week sprint. And you've got all the stuff you need to do for your project sitting in backlog. And by putting it in there and doing a retrospective after every sprint, you'll go back and say what worked, what didn't work, what can we improve. Now, a lot of that stuff is also done in Lean. I mean, there's a ton of overlap between these different strategies. But the reason I like Agile versus Lean in a construction situation is that we don't really have long processes we're doing, unless you're building a skyscraper in New York City. But if you're building, a $5 million manufacturing plant, or even a $25 million manufacturing plant, it's a relatively small project, and each of the pieces are going to go relatively quickly. And using Agile, or an Agile sort of planning methodology, along with all this other stuff you're talking about, would probably move you faster, would be my guess.
When you talk about Agile and Scrum, do me a favor, because some folks have a little bit different interpretations. Can you give me 1 or 2 sentences of an overall summary, and I can give you a response there? I appreciate you pushing back, by the way. So
yeah. Well, Scrum essentially is, it was developed by a guy named Jeff Sutherland, and it really basically exists in 3 areas. You have what's in the backlog, what you're working on, and what's been done. And we have a certain amount of points that we assign to every activity based on how difficult it is. And that point assignment is really kind of a trial and error thing when you first start. But the point of Scrum is to be able to get more points done in every sprint than you did before. So that essentially what you're trying to do is to increase the velocity of how you're getting things done. And when you bring it into a construction sort of thing, because it's only a 2 or 3 week sprint, if things get out of whack, it's easy to fix it. The other thing with Scrum, which also is often a part of Lean, is what's called the daily huddle, where you have a 15-minute meeting every morning to make sure you're on track and to fix things that get off track fast so they stay on track. And that's the thing. And then the other key piece is a retrospective, is looking back at what happened over the last sprint, what went well, what didn't go well. And they're simple to do, which is why I like it.
Yeah.
And my experience with construction companies is, if I can't make it simple, it's not going to be done.
Yeah. Well, let me respond to you. We're on the same page. So I've used Scrum on my projects. I haven't used the point system, so I don't want to insult the process by saying I've actually used it the way you're branding it. But, work to do, in progress, and complete on a board, 3 categories, huddling up together for specific tasks. Absolutely. I love that system. And to your point, I don't want to say smaller, but for some of the more, I would say more complex, maybe more focused areas, I find it effective. I have 2 parts to my response here real quick, and I appreciate you pushing back on that. Number one is what I find, and I'm not saying you are doing this, but most professionals in the industry want to take one solution and apply it to everything in construction. And I've just never found that to be possible. That's just not the case. So let's take, and you're familiar with the last planner system, correct? So, or let me just say the last planner.
Actually, I'm not, but that's if you could give a short explanation of what it is, that'd be great.
Perfect. So I'll use this as an example, and I just want to be clear. I love the last planner system. The system basically says that the last planners in the planning cycle, which are the foremen on your project site, need to really come together and make commitments together, real commitments, and not have a schedule just pushed and dictated to them by the general contractor, if that's the scenario we're looking at. And when they make commitments together and create a weekly work plan, which has a higher level of accuracy, a higher level of certainty to actually be carried out because people committed on it, then we execute on a daily basis in our huddle systems, right? And we also use pull planning, but that's a different story. And then we track what we did and we did not complete as compared to what our original plan was. And we come up with a percent plan complete or percent promises complete. And historically, what Last Planner says is that if we're over 80%, you're likely, historically, statistically, going to be on budget, ahead of schedule, with good quality. But if you're under 80%, you're not. I love this system.
It's simple. I love that. I love that. It's very simple. It's easy to, you explain it and I can figure it out without having to think really hard.
Yeah, it's and I agree. And there's a really good book that I'd like to promote here, and it's not my book, but it's called The Lean Builder. And I know the folks that wrote it. They're fantastic people. It's a fantastic book. It's recently won some awards for the Last Planner system. I love that system. When you get into a complex building, and this is outside of your point, so this is like $150 million projects. When you start to manage that much interior space, the Last Planner system starts to break down because the project team begins managing so many tasks that it becomes unmanageable. And so for instance, the research laboratory, the last project that I ran as a senior superintendent, when we had equipment in these modalities or the electrical upgrades that we were doing in the existing basement or these complex areas, I would always have what I called a Scrum board there with my 3 categories, and we would huddle on it daily because it was more nimble. I think, to your terminology, it was more agile. We were able to do those things. I would use the Last Planner system for the exterior because there was a certain amount of natural variation that we had to deal with because of deliveries coming in and out and the site work. But for the interiors, I would use Tact Planning because it kept things on a consistent flow and we had repetitive areas, and it reduced the amount of load on the project team because it was predictable and it was in a flow. So my perspective is, and lean practitioners throughout the industry constantly get annoyed at me. I feel that each tool has a proper application per project size, per circumstance. And so I agree with your point, actually. The trick for us is to find out what is applicable and useful to the person. And back to your point about making it simple, the person receiving it or implementing it or the superintendent that's managing the process has to have the aptitude, the capacity to do it. And so we need to tailor those tools to those persons. And so that's why I do like Scrum for that. And so I'm 100% agreeing with your point. The only thing that I would add at the end to push back a little bit is at least for the larger projects, sometimes Last Planner and Scrum on the point system asks, and this is my opinion, or maybe it doesn't ask, but the way people use it, sometimes those systems ask, what do we want to do in addition to what we need to do? What can we commit to? Which encourages, even if it's a little bit, maybe this is normal variation on a project. Sometimes Scrum and Last Planner encourage, even if it's a little bit, encourage some forms of variation. And if we focus on flow for the larger projects, for the areas of the project that are more typical, then we're able to plan manpower and information, materials, tools, and everything that we have to the point that those inventory levels can reduce. And when that's not predictable, inventory levels increase because foremen and trade partners and suppliers are like, I don't know when this general contractor is going to change the plan. So I'm going to bring out everything into my little shopping area, my little shopping mall, my market over here. I'm going to bring all of the duct. I'm going to bring all of the fire sprinkler pipe. I'm going to bring all of my electrical rough in, all of my conduit on my greenies. And when materials, when inventory increases, the movement, the waste, the defects, and everything else, all of the waste in construction start to increase, which increases manpower, which increases costs. So I would maybe push back and say, I do love Scrum. I do love the Last Planner system. I love it when they're appropriately applied, and that wherever we can, we create flow and stability and hold those schedule dates in advance so that we can reduce inventory, which overproduction and inventory are the mother of all waste for us. So there you go. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it is. So Jason, here's the thing which I just want our listeners to get their arms around. Here's what I want you to do. We've been talking through process control jargon for the last 20 minutes. We haven't really stopped to explain what each piece made. And if we did, we've already spent an hour and a half. The good news about jargon is it's shorthand for how to communicate effectively. The bad thing about jargon is it's shorthand how to communicate effectively, meaning that if you're not part of the tribe, you don't get it. So I'm going to really encourage you. Jason mentioned a book about construction lean. I'm going to recommend that you read Scrum, which is by Jeff Sutherland. I'm also going to suggest that you read The Goal by Elia Goldratt, which is about the theory of constraints. And what you're going to find that all three of these areas, I also read The Toyota Way, which is the original book on lean. And I would really encourage folks to say, what piece can I use in my company to be effective? And even better, I'm going to give Jason a plug because I've been looking for somebody like him for several years now who actually understands how to do process improvement within the construction world. It basically doesn't exist. I mean, I have talked to people. I have talked to several construction consultants and say, are you using Agile with your clients? Or are you using theory of constraints with your clients? And they say, what's that? So you need to learn about this stuff. It's really, really important. If you don't learn about it, 7 or 8 years from now, you're not going to be able to compete because there's going to be enough people doing it. And it's going to hit critical mass. It's not there yet. You want to be at the front end, so you're always ahead of the pack. But it's really important. Jason, I'm sorry I went on a soliloquy. I'm also sorry, but we're out of time.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that people want to find you because I think what you're doing is really interesting. So how do they do that?
I have a couple ways to do that. So the Elevate Construction podcast, we're at episode 95. There's some great content in there, especially for people in construction, leadership, team building, war stories, lean, and also at our website, elevateconstructionist.com. So that's all one word and then .com. So elevateconstructionist.com. IST stands for Insights, Solutions, and Training. We also do boot camps for training field personnel in construction, and we have a book coming out soon. So please check us out. We'd love to have you check out our podcast. And I do want to say we're out of time, but I +1 on The Goal. I absolutely love that book. And yeah, if you're not ready if you're not starting this now, you will be behind the curve in 7 to 8 years. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I'd like you to do is one of the things I kind of obsess about is what I call the sale-ready company. And whenever I say sale-ready company, the people I'm talking with always get it backwards. I'm not recommending you sell your company. I'm recommending you have your company ready for sale. It is a big difference. Having your company ready for sale just means that other people from outside your company want to own it. And the reason they want to own it because you have developed a great company. Now, there's 8 things you need to do to create a sale-ready company. I've written an ebook about it. I actually have my second Parables coming out, which talks about doing a sale-ready company with an internal family sale. And we'll talk about that later. But for the time being, just go to www.sustainablebusiness.co/sale-ready. You get the ebook free. I think you'll like it. And what I'd like you to do is read it and let me know what you think. Hey, this is Josh Patrick. We're with Jason Schroeder. We are at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.